Welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Thursday, March the 20th, 2025, and we're honored to be able to be with you. Good to see you, Cami. I thought about calling you this morning to check in and see how you're doing. Hope everybody's listening is doing well, and we're ready to take everything that we're doing to the next level. If you're out there with a thought or a question, there is a button in the app with which you click call. Then it'll ask you to click in a couple little blanks, little check squares, and that will light up the call button down below. You push that button, and it will tell me that you're ready for a conversation. And if you have any questions or thoughts, I would be delighted to have a conversation with you. If there's any way we can support you, please push that button. Or if you have a question, of course, you can do the same. You can push that button and ask your question live. One of the sweet things about this app is anybody in the world, and we'd appreciate if you'd share with anybody anywhere in the world. All you need is an internet connection. No phone signal needed anymore. And so you can also put your questions in the chat room or in the comment box, and I'll certainly be glad to ask them. You can email any questions that you have to Jeanie, Jeanie, at whyagain.org, and she'll share them with me and we'll answer them as they come in. And or if you've got the Heartland Aramaic Mission Forgiveness app, you can go into the app and any page. This is one of the later additions. I think we're probably in about our sixth iteration of that app. Thank you, Jeanie, for how brilliantly you put it together. We get a lot of feedback from people that are really enjoying it, especially people at night that, it's dark, but something comes that they need to do some work on. Rather than turning on a light and getting out a pen and paper, they just turn on the app and bingo, the app's right there. But on any page in the app, there's a button you can push and you can ask any question you've got, whether it's about any aspect of the work or the worksheet you're working on. You can ask that question, hit send. Jeanie will receive that, and we'll read it on the next radio show and provide the answers that we have. So delighted that you're here. And again, if you have a question or a thought, support needed. Push that call button. Let's say hello. And if we don't have anyone with a question for us, then what I'm going to invite you to do is to just sit back and we're going to tap in. I had shared a question, or I'd started to share a question yesterday before we got a live caller, and so I'm going to go back to that question and see if we can answer that for someone who had written in. In the meantime, if you have a comment, put it in the comment bar and or push that call button, and let's talk about it. So I had shared that this young lady who's been doing this work for 25 years or so, and in the note that she sent me, she acknowledges that she's now 85 years circling the sun. And she's still rocking on doing this work, just really powerfully. So delighted that you're here and that you're out there creating in the world. So her note brings forward the question or the comment and the question. I was programmed by my dearly departed father from early childhood, who often repeated this idea. You'll never know a man who loves you as much as your father does. And I started to share this a little bit before a caller came in, so I'm just going to give another picture of that and offer the feedback. And my offering is that what that sounds like is a power person message. And a power person message is an energetic message, an energetic dynamic that we hear or see. There are actually two ways to receive a power person message. One be directly. The words are actually said as you're demonstrating in your note here. You'll never know a man who loves you as much as your father. That's an active power person message. And then there's a passive power person message where out of an experience or a behavior that I see, I come to a conclusion. And that conclusion can be about myself or about life or about people or about relationships, whatever it is. And what happens once a power person message is instilled in the mind is that message governs the output of what we call the automatic decision system. And until it's dismantled, that kind of message will run all behaviors in your life, ultimately. It will be the undergirding, it will be the underlying or the unconscious dynamic behind everything that comes up in relationship to whatever the message involves. So in this case, it involves relationships for this lady with men. So my offering is that with that kind of energetic dynamic, and here's someone at 85 who's still looking at and trying to or working through that particular message, this to me just is a powerful illustration of how the undergirding or the unconscious dynamic of the perceptual constructs of the mind always reflect whatever that message was about until it's dismantled, because perception is the thing that drives behavior. You know, I have a situation that happens and someone gives me the look, and I have in my automatic decision system, when anybody gives me the look, I know I'm being rejected, and what I do is I just lash out at them. And so someone who, let's say, holds that as a dynamic in their minds, says to themselves on this one time when they lashed out, oh, I don't like this about myself. I'm never going to lash out at anybody ever again. And the next time the stress is up and the chips are down, they lash out. Why? Because the underlying unconscious dynamic involved has not been changed. This is really common in alcoholic situations. You know, we've all heard of the alcoholic who, you know, the morning after the night before becomes aware of what they've done. They were told what they did. They were maybe in a drunken stupor, don't remember, but they were told and they're embarrassed, they're ashamed. They're just, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I will never do that again. And they're really serious. They really mean, I will never do that again. But that has no impact on whether or not they're going to do it again. Because until the underlying power person dynamic involved is surfaced and dismantled, that will always be a factor in every behavior prompt that the mind comes up with. So when a particular situation presents itself that resonates a power person dynamic, there's a complex of inclinations. You know, I might have this inclination that comes from, oh, I'm never going to say that, do that again. And energetically, you know, if you think about all of this as energy and brain cells firing at a certain strength. So if I say I'll never do that again, the strength of that commitment might be a level 3. So the voice that comes up in me, and this will be one of my inclinations, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to control myself. But if the voice of the power person is at a level 8 and it's resonated into activity, that inclination is overridden by the automatic decision system saying, no, when somebody gives us the look, this is what we do. We rage at them. That will become the stronger inclination and will govern the behavior. And there's why the forgiveness process is so important, because each time you apply it, and you know, one forgiveness worksheet or process around a given situation is probably not going to change an old habitual behavior. It's going to take many worksheets for the unconscious dynamic to be uncovered and diffused. I mean literally energetically diffused. So being a creator, as long as the power person message governs, we move in the direction of producing that result in our creative process. And until one gets to the root of the underlying energetic dynamic and weakens that, false perceptions are going to result, and that false message will be presented by the mind as true. So there's a starting point to look at that statement. And while And then she goes on to say, well, as an adult, I can accept his good intentions. Well, I hear you. And in the past, I've processed with this woman around her father and how deeply she cares for him and cherishes him, and how deeply he cared for and cherished her. And I'm going to take a chance here on playing John the Baptist. And I'll just ask you to breathe. And I only offer this as an example of what can happen with a power person message. So my offering would be that, and I hear you loud and clear that your whole experience with him is how he cherished you and how he always had good intentions toward you. But when you look at this message, it might it and the reason I do this, the reason I offer this is because as long as you hold that everything he ever did came from good intentions, which would mean he was someone who's perfect, then every message he ever gave you, your mind will treat as true. And in this case, his words indicate that there might be something other than the highest of intentions involved. No offense to him, but unless he was the ultimate God being, the ultimate perfect person, we all have intentions stored in our minds that take over and perhaps cause us to do things that are less than what would be ideal, pardon me. So when I read this message, and I'll go back and read it again, you verbatim repeated what the message you at least took away from him as a child, and that was, you'll never know a man who loves you as much as your father does. Now, my offering is I listen to those words. Remember Shakespeare, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. I would offer there's a good chance there were some unconscious dynamics here, perhaps some insecurity with that. You might look at, whether there were any other areas or situations where perhaps insecurity showed up. But my take would be that if there were no insecurity in him, his statement would probably be, I cherish you so deeply. And you know what? The men who show up, or a man who shows up in your life, is going to cherish you just as much as I, and perhaps even more, and be there for you 100%, rather than the unconscious language that indicates that, well, I'm always going to be the best in your life and nobody could match. So I invite you to, it might be worth doing some worksheet work, and I'm hoping that it works. You had shared, and I'm sharing this for the rest of the audience. I hope that you can call in tomorrow, as you said you would, and we can process this a little bit. So my take, just listening to those words, if I know nothing about you, know nothing about your father, is that there's perhaps some insecurity that had him as an adult, making sure that he was always going to be number one in your life. And so I would suggest some forgiveness work around that. And that might be a worksheet on yourself. Maybe you misread this. I don't know. So that might be a worksheet on myself. Uh, Maybe you heard it absolutely accurately. And if you look at and really objectively analyze the speech, then in essence, this is a put down of any man that might ever show up in your life. And for me, that speech would reflect that there's some sort of an insecurity. And when you can look at that, if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, I'm just offering this as a possibility. When you asked me about this, when we talked about it, you had said you just really wanted to look at, seeing as how this dynamic is still going on in your life after 85 years, that you really want to dismantle it. And if you can look at that and see that, then that will tend to collapse the influence of this power person's message on your own automatic decision system and on the way your mind perceives the world, perceives you, perceives relationships. So, as I say, I'm taking a chance playing John the Baptist there, and hope that opens up a space that might help you to look at something differently. And if it doesn't fit, throw it out, please, 100%. Everything that I offer on this show, every piece of feedback, I realize comes from my mind, from my brain cells, and I only offer it as, well, here are possibilities. Take it into yourself, look at it. If there's some work to be done there, then go ahead and do that work. So if he were somewhat insecure, thinking about his daughter, there are situations, I don't know, you don't mention at what age he gave you this message, but there are situations that I've worked with people where a father was jealous over his daughter moving into a relationship, had fear about a daughter, being taking attention away. So it might be something worth looking at and see if he had some need, as you might do a worksheet on him and what was his need, what was his goal in sending that message. You could even do a worksheet as him. You could imagine yourself as him having a daughter that he deeply cherishes, and what would the goal behind delivering that message to his daughter be? And by catching that goal, you might get some insight. And if there's any limitation in his energy field, that even though he's not in his body anymore, that he has not resolved, then you're being able to embrace that. You're being able to ask for his guidance, his input could be very powerful in releasing him as well. Because it is, when you really look at it honestly, it is a pretty negative message about men that might come into your life. So I say this carefully to invite you to recognize that if this is a flaw he had, then you can embrace him totally and completely in love and delete any influence that might have had in your life as you are asking this question. Oftentimes we live by what I'm starting to call the law of the power person, where we simply play out what the power person implanted in us. And, if he had been able to, if he, and I'm saying an if is conditional, if happens to be accurate, if he were solid and grounded in relationship to you, then he would have shared with you how there was going to be this awesome man who would show up in your life and you could create eternal, wondrous relationship and have the kind of support that we all really aspire to. And then one of the other, this is kind of an aside type of topic, but it's one that I think is important. And I say this over and over and over again. In order to really truly step into a space of healing, we have to really be stepping into a space of truth. And almost every key word from the Aramaic language in the teachings of Yeshua has been turned literally by the Greeks 180 degrees out of phase with the truth of what he said. And so, you know, and we've used examples of it before. Forgiveness has become, I'll let you off the hook. When forgiveness is a tool I go inside myself and remove my pain and trauma with. Love has become something we do to somebody else, something we get from somebody else, something we give to somebody else. Or it's become sexual athletics, or it's become, putting your head on the chopping block to show you love somebody, you sacrifice for them. And none of that has anything to do with love. And my offering to everybody is nobody has ever loved you. Nobody will ever love you. You have never loved anyone, and you never will love anyone. Now, that really, for a lot of people, raises the issue of holding the breath. It's like, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I thought God loved me. No, God doesn't love you. Love isn't a verb. It's not something we can do to each other. That's the Greek backward translation. Backward interpretation, I should say. I never, if I make the mistake of applying the word translation to anything the Greeks did with the Aramaic scriptures, please help me correct that error, because there's never been a translation that I know of in the Greek. There have been lots of interpretations, but when you turn a tool with which you go inside yourself and change the content of your own mind into an interpretation that it's about everything's everybody else's fault. I'm a member of the one world universal religion to blame, so I'm going to let them off the hook. I'm going to forgive them. Then I'm working with a very poor interpretation of what was originally taught. And so I hear loud and clear that your father really cherished you. And, from our past processing around dad, I know that you deeply, deeply honor and cherish him. And I'm with you 100% with that. But when we use the word love to represent that, we're making a mistake. We're now out of the realm of truth. The truth is, your essence is love. The truth is, the essence of your father is love. When the father looks at a dearly cherished child, the father is not experiencing loving the child. We say it, we flood our minds with that reality, with that construct, but it's not true. The child's essence is love. And if that resonates the essence of the father in the child, then the father experiences through interaction with the child who he is. Our culture's made the mistake of calling that loving someone rather than what's accurate and true. And again, you can't have real healing until you get to truth. So what's happening is the essence, the love that the child is, resonates the love that the father is. And the father is able to experience his essence in the presence of the child. And from that state, he cherishes the child. We've made the mistake of making love into a verb rather than honoring it for what it is it's a noun. If I'm attracted to someone, if I go into a relationship with someone, I look at Jeanie and that resonates the deepest love in me that I've ever experienced, that I can imagine. And I realize that from that space, there are all kinds of wonderful things in interaction with Jeanie and in our relationship. But I don't love her. I get to experience being the presence of love with her. She resonates that in me, and that is something that's just such a gift. And so when I experience who I am as love, I get to honor and cherish and have wondrous things with the person that I'm in relationship with. And when I'm filled with those feelings of love, I am filled, my essence, my being is incarnating in my physiology. When that happens, if there are other things that come up, like hostility, fear, sadness, grief, that need to be healed in order to fully embody as love, and in order to, as love, resonate someone who has the matching energetic pattern of love that functions out of that same pattern, that's the person who I'm going to find fulfilling relationship with. And so to recognize that you cherish your dad and dad cherishes you, and you bring each other to that state and that experience of conscious, active, present love is a wonderful thing to have with someone. It's a gift, I believe, directly from the Creator. And when I begin to rectify my mind's perception about love, then I get to experience who I am and I get to honor who others are as the presence of love. You remember that in the ancient scriptures, they talked about the power of words, and they said the power of life and death is in your words. If words are used inaccurately, then destruction comes. And it doesn't matter if they're wonderful words. We have this statement that ostensibly Yeshua made, totally, completely false in the Greek. But they said to Yeshua, what's most important in the law? And the Greeks misuse the word love, and they say, you must love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, my offering is that is one of the worst pieces of advice that any human being could ever receive. Well, Michael, what do you mean by that? Why that doesn't make any sense? Well, let me explain what I mean by that. If I have, let's say, some form of hostility or fear in me, as an energetic being, as a creator, through those unresolved energies of hostility and fear, I'm going to draw somebody with me who's going to act out or respond to that hostility or fear energy in me and is going to do some kind of a behavior that's probably going to resonate my hostility or fear. If somebody came along and told me you've got to love your neighbor and love is supposed to be whatever all this crazy stuff is, and my neighbor resonates my rage, I don't have any choice about that. If there's rage in me and the neighbor does a behavior that does a match to my rage is going to come up. Now, what happens if I've been beat over the head into believing that I'm supposed to love my neighbor and here I am at rage at my neighbor? All of a sudden, a whole cascade of things happens in my mind. I'm now a failure. I made a commitment. I said, I'm going to love you. I'm now a fraud. The guilt involved in that is enormous. If I'm using words properly and I recognize that I am love and my neighbor is love, that is the essence of each of us, and my neighbor comes forward and I do what Yeshua said in that command, he didn't say love your neighbor, he said have rahma for your neighbor. And that's a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that allows you to maintain the presence of active love, your human life in your human form, no matter what's going on. You are incarnate in your own form when you have Rahma open. And now, if your neighbor comes along and does something that brings up your rage, instead of doing a whole guilt trip on yourself of, oh, I was supposed to love my neighbor, but now I'm raging at them, then I can own, I can breathe, and I can recognize, oh, here's my neighbor resonating my rage, showing me my mental illness. This is my opportunity to heal my mind. And this I'd offer is one of the primary purposes of relationship to show us what it is we need to heal. So there was never a command to love your neighbor. It was a command to maintain Rahma, which meant you kept love, your essence, present in your physiology. And if that happens, your neighbor shows you your rage, then you'll breathe, you'll apply forgiveness, you'll remove your rage, and you'll heal as a result of this neighbor giving you this gift. And if you are tied, if you are committed, and if you are staying in that space of active love, then probably the matching bag of garbage that your neighbor has is also going to have the opportunity to heal, and both of you will move upward as a result of that. But if you got two people who are all brainwashed into you're supposed to love your neighbor, and now they're at rage with each other, now all the guilt, all the shame, all the blame, all the unresolved is going to surface. The accurate use of language is important. Yeshua said, have Rahma, keep this condition in your mind. And there's no such word in the English or the Greek or the Latin languages where we derive our meanings from the Aramaic. There's not even a concept for such a thing. But if literally my human essence, love, is present in my physiology, when I think of neighbor, and neighbor in the Aramaic language is anybody that you think about. So think back in your life at situations where you weren't able to hold Rahma. And so that's kind of a lead up to the next statement that she makes in her question. So she's questioning this thing of how dad implanted that idea. And then she shares in her note, my experience has been one 15-year marriage with my college sweetheart. And after our divorce, 6 serial monogamies lasting from 2.5 to 16 years. I've forgiven my romantic idealism, projected expectations, my father's belief in much more. Yet I find myself upset when relationships end and visualizing the spiritual commitment I desire. So when relationships end, I find myself upset. awesome, responsible communication. You're owning that this is your upset. And so I would suggest that perhaps some worksheets around relationships ending. And I'll offer you a mind shifter. So the mind shifter I would offer you is that it is safe and healing. It is safe and healing. And I maintain my human essence love, comma, if the ending of a relationship occurs, period. So I would suggest working with that mind shifter and just see what comes up in response to that. And for anybody who's not familiar with the mind shifter tool, it's one of the tools we offer in our intensives. And by definition, a mind shifter is a thought about an issue in your life around around which you have negative thoughts, and it's the opportunity to surface, process, and release the negative thoughts. Sometimes people call them affirmations, but we suggest you forget and never do affirmations. The reason is because my definition of an affirmation would be an affirmation is a thought that you know isn't true, that you're pretending or trying to force to be true. And the reason it's not true is because there's an energy in you that inhibits it from being true. When you transform your affirmation into a mind shifter, and here's how you use the mind shifter tool, you divide a page in two. On the left-hand side of the page, you write the mind shifter. So you'd start out, if you're going to use this mind shifter, it is safe and healing, and I maintain my human essence love if the ending of a relationship occurs. So you'd write that on the left-hand side of the page, and then what comes up on the other side of the page? So remember, the mind works by resonance. If I say don't think about the color of your car, what moves in your mind? If I talk about the safety of relationship ending, what's that going to do? It's going to resonate whatever's in your relationship file. So, you talked about an early marriage with childhood sweetheart. So the first thought that might come up in response to it is safe and healing, and I maintain my human essence love. If the ending of a relationship occurs, might be, oh my God, when I broke up with my high school sweetheart, I was just in such terror and trauma. I thought that life was over, and I would never be happy again. So if that's what comes up, then that's what you'd write on the right-hand side of the page. And then you might have still another thought, and the other thought might be, and I remember when I broke up with that third monogamous relationship, it was the same feeling like was over. If you've run out of things to do, you write the mind shifter again. It's safe and healing, and I maintain my human essence love if the end of a relationship occurs. And that might be, then your mind might say, well, that's crazy. That's such trauma. That's such tragedy. Okay, so what you've just uncovered is worksheets on tragedy, worksheets on trauma, worksheets on life being over. And so with something as serious as this issue is for you, that you're really ready to work through it and really create an awesome relationship in your world, then I would suggest you take a time where you've turned your phone off and you've got at least 3 or 4 hours, and you just sit and you write this mind shifter on the left side of the page and write everything that comes up in response to it on the right hand side of the page. Every thought, every feeling, whether it seems like it relates or not, and spend 3 or 4 hours just open flow, just free association, let it flow. Then after you've completed that process, then take some time and go back over your list and look at, geez, I'd kind of forgotten how tragic, life appeared to me when that early childhood sweetheart or youth sweetheart, when that broke up. I totally forgotten about that. Hmm. And I do a worksheet around that. And, you know, there might be a whole variety of worksheets I could do on just that one simple memory. Life is over. Hmm. I do a worksheet on that. And in the context of that early relationship ending. And when I do the worksheet on that and the goal that I had for the person, the man I was married to at that point, being the woman that you are, that that goal might have been for him to just cherish you forever. And when you cancel the goal for that to happen, just an example, the kind of insight that might come from way back, you said you married out of school. So, I'm going to assume maybe you were 25 or 30 when that relationship ended. So, the message you might have taken away from that might be, well, nobody's ever going to honor and cherish me. I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy. Then I would take that and put it into a worksheet. Because if I hold that I'm never going to be honored and cherished energetically, then what will happen is if someone comes toward me who has the capacity to honor and cherish me, that energy of, no, you can't honor and cherish me, would tend to unconsciously drive them away. So when I let myself do the worksheet to touch into that unconscious belief that I had about myself of since he left, since we divorced, I'm not worthy. Then as I clean that up, all of a sudden I'm no longer energetically sending out a signal. Remember that in order to have a thought, an energy has to move in you. By definition, energy is motion. And everything that moves sets up an energy wave. So if that early thought sets up that energy wave, and then of course it ties into the power person dynamic that's also under the surface, a part of the inclination toward behavior towards self, attitude towards self. If it's, oh yeah, my dad told me that nobody would ever love me that deeply. And here, after that first marriage ended, I realized that, nobody would ever because I'm not worthy. So that is the next worksheet. So then you'd put your name in number one. And what's the feeling? Well, I might want to say I'm feeling not worthy, but that's not a feeling, that's a thought. So when you think the thought, I'm not worthy, as an example, how do you feel? Oh, grief and sadness. Okay, so that would be number 1B. What's the thought behind that? Well, you just established it. It's I'm not worthy. And just go forward with the forgiveness process from there and reach into the depths of, and this very likely, if you look at the history of the way women have been treated in our world, this very likely is a generational pattern. Think back to mom and how she was cherished and how she was honored. Think back to grandma. What did you know about grandma or maybe even great grandma? And as you start to look at what might be a generational pattern of the way women are treated, and who knows what the beliefs might be. So your note goes on to say, I know the men in my past loved me. And again, I'd offer none of them did. They cherished you, they honored you, but love is the essence of who they are and the essence of who you are, and offered the best of themselves to me. Now, the next statement that you make, you'll remember when we spoke yesterday, we talked about regulatory speech. Shakespeare gave us a really powerful statement. He said, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. We're creative beings. What Shakespeare's referring to with that simple statement, if you've got the eyes to see and the ears to hear it, what Shakespeare's saying is that I have words that I speak and I'm totally unconscious of the thoughts behind them. A person, if you take that idea from Shakespeare and you put it into an ancient scriptural context, that would be called living in the desert. Remember, there's this group of people, pretty bright people. They know all about astronomy. I guarantee you that they didn't get lost in a 35 square mile hot sandy place for 40 years. It was not about that. What happened? The word desert there is a code word for the unconscious. They were lost. Most people, and they were lost for 40 years, most people are lost in the unconscious dynamics for about 40 years. That's exactly what Shakespeare's saying here. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. I'm not conscious of how I'm creating or what I'm creating out of. So when you pay attention to your words, you'll see precisely what you've dissociated from in your own mind. The ancient scriptures talk about that. Listen to the quotes they have and how it matches with Shakespeare here. Out of the abundance of the heart, remember that word is unconscious, though it's not designed to be. We're not, my take is that it's totally unnatural for a human being to have an unconscious mind. But we have lived so many generations in denial and been trained by those in denial that that is our predominant state of mind. If you talk to the average psychologist today, they'll tell you 80, 85, 90, perhaps as much as 95 to 98% of our so-called thinking is unconscious. We're not designed to have an unconscious thought. So this quote from Luke 6:45, out of the abundance of the heart, the unconscious, the mouth speaks. Now in our laws of living intensive, we spend a lot of time on what we call regulatory speech and understanding how regulatory speech functions, the power that it has, and what it means when we use it. So regulatory speech is a speech that we use habitually, and it literally governs our cellular chemistry. It literally governs the emotions that we experience. It literally governs our physiology, and it governs our creative process. So this next statement that you make is really revealing for you, because what happens is we only speak words that reflect what's firing in brain cells. Though we can be in denial of what's firing in brain cells, and therefore we say, well, this isn't true about me. Now, I always use an example when I share this, and that is, let's imagine, and I think I used this just a couple of days ago, I'm in Kansas City visiting my son and my new grandson, which is really awesome. And I'm getting ready to fly home back to Bristol. What would be the only reason if you and I had a conversation tomorrow and I said to you, I'm not going to California before I go back home? What would the only reason be that I would say that? I'd only say I'm not going to California because there's something about California firing in brain cells. I wouldn't say I'm going to Timbuktu. I'm not going to Timbuktu. I'm not going to Toronto. I'm not going to Beijing, unless going to Toronto, Timbuktu, or Beijing was in brain cells. So as you speak about how these men cherished you and offered the best of themselves, you then say there is no blame, shame, resentment, or sad residue remaining. Now, when you look at that from the perspective of regulatory speech, there are probably 5 of your most important worksheets. Pardon me, 4. Blame, shame, resentment, sad residue. I'd make that the topic of many worksheets. Because if in fact, out of those relationships where these men cherished you, there were only wondrous memories and it's okay, I would say, you know, I was through that early childhood sweetheart thing, and I had several serial monogamous relationships, some of them lasting a long time, and I am so totally appreciative and at peace with that. If I were appreciative and at peace with that, that's what I'd be saying. I wouldn't be saying there's no blame, shame, resentment, or sad residue. So I would offer that those words indicate on an unconscious level that's what still needs to be resolved. Again, Shakespeare My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. When the words blame, shame, resentment, and sad residue fly up, it's because they're thoughts of that hidden in the unconscious. And remember, when they spoke about what we need to look out for, they didn't say take care of the other guy, for out of them are the issues in life. What did they say? They said take care of the heart. I have to take care of my own unconscious. And these words are clues that in your unconscious, these are issues to be resolved, would be my offering. So if you listen to your speech, the bottom line lesson of regulatory speech is if you pay attention to your words, you will see precisely what you've dissociated from. And then again, Luke 6:45, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And then if we go on with another scriptural quote, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. Now, leaving the word man out, male or female, a good woman brings good things out of the good stored in the heart. Now, let's look at what that word good means, because good is, when we use it the way this culture uses it, is a totally relative term. What I consider to be good, you might go, ew, that's horrible. I wouldn't even touch that with a 10-foot pole. So is there this good and bad thing, this good and evil thing? No. If you go back to the Aramaic language, that word good, you hear the creator describing in the creation story all these things being created, and the creator saw that it was good and saw that it was good. It doesn't mean good in the relative sense that we use it of I like it or I don't like it. What it means is in its proper place, in its proper time. So when this quote says, a good man or woman brings good things out of the good stored in the heart. So we're talking now again about the unconscious. My words fly up. My words indicate to me what's in my heart. So if I'm in alignment with truth, then I'm going to bring forward every experience in its proper place and in its proper time. And my offering would be that each of those relationships that you spoke about in your note were in their proper place and in their proper time. And if you had and applied forgiveness at the moment each of those relationships were stressed, then they would have been, in this context of this language that's being used, good relationships, because they gave you the opportunity. They were in their proper place. They gave you the opportunity to heal what you needed to heal. And then the second half of that statement is about an evil man. Now, rather than applying the Greek idea of evil here, let's go back to the Aramaic idea of evil. In the Aramaic language, sin, really important word. It's got nothing to do with the Greeks taught us. It's an archery term. And when I picked up the bow and arrow and fired at the target and I missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell sin. If I picked up my bow and arrow and fired at the target and missed the bullseye or the target altogether, then the scorekeeper would yell out evil. So in its proper place or in its proper time. So this passage goes on to say, an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored in his heart. So if I have those energetic patterns in me that are off target, then that's going to come up and it's going to tend to interfere with my creative process in my life. And that particular passage goes on, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. So my offering, dear heart, would be that this is probably the core of the work that will clear the space for you to be able to totally and completely be physiologically incarnated as love in your own cellular structure, so that every cell is literally flooded with, powered by, and fueled by active present love. And then, as you do that, the the creative, energetic field that you send out that says that you're ready for a really totally fulfilling eternal relationship is the only energy that will extend out from you. And I base that on the next paragraph of your question, where you say, yet after my recent 85th birthday, yay, glad you're so vital and alive, I still desire a conscious, creative, intimate partner with which to co-create our human loving lives. And so I hold the space for that to happen, for you to do the healing work that you need to do to attract the gift of that awesome, sweet, supportive relationship where you have a man that cherishes you as deeply as your father ever did, without being in competition with him, but just as deeply as your father did, and honors you as deeply as well. And I'll offer that the way that Jeanie and I met was through eharmony.com. And we found it to be an absolutely perfect place to engage in creating relationship. You know, where most of the online dating services are kind of meat markets, frankly, sadly. eHarmony is one that's set up for people who are serious. Like, first of all, you don't just get online and generate yourself a fake profile or whatever. You literally register, you pay for the service, and then you do a profile that takes, if I remember correctly, now this is 20 years ago for Jeanie and I, it takes about 2 hours to fill out the profile. And then they, of course, everybody that's on the site has that profile set up, and then they match you, if I remember correctly, in 20 different areas. So before you ever meet a person, you know that you've got a match in at least 20 different areas before you ever say the first word to each other. And what they do is they send out a questionnaire to each person. If you find a match, let's say someone matches, you know there are 20 arenas in your life, and they're all based on the profile that you filled out. They're things that you have in common. And then they will send you each a questionnaire if you each consent to connect, and you can hide your picture or show your picture. Both Jeanie and I had our pictures hidden, so we didn't know what each other looked like. And they send you a set of questions which you answer and you send to that person, and they kind of act as the firewall. You only have a first name and the city that they're in. And when you do a profile on eharmony.com, I don't get any commission from them, I promise. But when you do a profile, you can choose whether you want somebody within your own hometown or your own home state or the country or the world. Well, back 20 years ago, I was traveling the globe, so I put it in as global. And so you fill out that set of questions and you send it back to the person you had matched with. They answer those questions as well and send it to you. Now, if based on those answers you say, well, don't want to meet, bingo, you're deleted, and they don't need, all they know is the name and the city. Then a second round of questions, then a third round of questions. Now you can elect to speed the process up if you both agree, but it's only after that 3 rounds of questions and you both agree to it that you actually get introduced to this person, that you get to see who they are and you get to have contact information. So it one of the things, my take on eHarmony is that it kind of eliminates players. And there are a lot of players out there, sadly, in the world. A lot of people who've been so abused mentally, physically, emotionally, and left so void of their human lives that all they can think about is going for sensation or looks or something that is really not of much value at all. And so you might put yourself into and do a profile there and just see what happens. I would think in Florida, being 85 and as vital as you are, there are lots of people there that and you could be really selective in what you put in as to what you're looking for, who you're looking for, what the characteristics are. One of the last things they do is you send to your partner a list of things that are deal breakers. You can't stand. This will break it. You send that to them and they send it to you. And if it's broken, it's broken. But otherwise, you get to connect. Jeanie and I played chess online. We watched movies online before we ever met. We were in communication for a matter of a couple of weeks before we ever met. And then we picked a neutral place to go and meet, and connected. And once we connected, that was it for both of us. Neither of us thought about, have looked at, or had any inclination in any way, shape, or form, mentally, physically, or emotionally, to anyone else. It's just been, that was it. Done deal. And so I hold the space, and I hope that it works tomorrow to take this conversation forward and see how this feedback fits and if we can support you anymore. I'm hoping this really is supportive of you, and I really hold the space for you and for everyone to be treated. And this part of this conversation for me comes from, my granddaughter now is 6, and we're contemplating with her as she grows the kind of young woman she's going to be. She's so creative, so intelligent, just amazing. And we've been working with her to support her in being filled with messages and understanding that allow her to recognize who she really is and to know that out there is a relationship that is just going to be so awesome and so uplifting and so embracing for her that it will change her eternal life for the better. And dear heart, I offer that support for you as well. And I hope we can have a conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, it's 2 o'clock. Time flies when you're having fun. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Been a delight to share with you. I hope you're ready to have the best year yet of your eternal life and pass that along. Take care. Blessings. Bye-bye.